The historic normal in political dialogue regarding the corruption that exists in the United States is to riposte to the dissenter, beware the alternative, by which they mean communism usually, or sometimes fascism, something other than not democracy, but Hollywood. The difference between democracy and Hollywood is that democracy respects the results. It's not that you can't say anything, it's that peer review subjects what you say to checks and balances. Whereas in Hollywood, peer review is just about how much applause, how much excitement, how much tension, how much even reaction is generated by what people say and how they say it. It's important to understand that there's a lot of tension going on in America between Hollywood and democracy. To say a little bit about Russia, if America can't review itself, how can you expect Russia to sit still and listen to us banging on about how great we are? I think most of them are professional people. I realize they have reform problems, but they were exasperated by our unwillingness to meet them halfway. We should have reached further than ever in our efforts to diplomatically reconcile our spirits with their spirits when they were open to reform. But nothing was further from the truth. To say that we have an aggravated tensions is simply ridiculous. When Mr. Putin comes out and says they destroyed a country, they destroyed Iraq, nice of them, it's clear that that's what happened. And he's not just using it for propaganda value. There is the potential to use my work for propaganda value. There is no question that Hollywood already misuses my work. I don't know that Russia would misuse my work because I don't know to what degree my work has exposed their hidden hand in what had happened. But the question of whether those forces in Russia who have a hidden hand involved in what happened is an open question. It's open to review. It's open to everybody. Nobody in the right mind would think that the United Nations would sit still and fail to ask a question like that. To their credit, Russia has always spoken softly, differentially, but firmly with concerns that were the same of mine. I don't think that there's anyone who remembers the 80s who doesn't know the name of Erhard Giesler, who raised concerns about what was happening at Fort Detrick. My research doesn't implicate Fort Detrick, it implicates the Salk Research Laboratories in San Diego and the Hollywood Insane Asylum that developed in the East End District of Pittsburgh, some of whom still work in advanced materials and devices at Mellon Institute. With that kind of background and injuries like mine, you can well imagine the genuine concern that the Russians have a right to bring forward and ask our professional attention be that we do our level best to research and investigate what's going on. That's all I'm doing. I'm doing my level best not to allow perverts from Hollywood to misuse my work. I'm not unaware that ideologues from the left can misuse my work. And sometimes it seems that there's an alliance of convenience between people like Gerald Horne and the right wing thinkers in the former Soviet Union, now Russian Federation, who prey on American helplessness towards the bigotry and violence and extremism that we have to somehow navigate to improve ourselves and improve our society. Nobody has the right to despair. The stakes are too high. The children are too critical to the health of the planet. We have to work together somehow. That's the reason why I've embraced Glasnost. I'm trying my level best to be as transparent as possible. Now, when it impacted neuroplasm like mine, this was hardwired to make transparency look for the purposes of extremists in Hollywood like demonism or something, to conjure the enemy within, which was a pun on Robert Kennedy's book by the people who designed the paperback cover, by the way, as my semiotic research shows. It's not surprising I end up quarantined at Section 8. I have my freedoms. I'm in jeopardy. Things happen that shouldn't. I've been poisoned. But the truth is the truth. We're dealing with a fringe that has persuasion because of their success in being cloak and dagger. The way to deal with these mobsters is through address of the premises that things have to be hidden, that the nature of reality requires cloak and dagger. I don't see it that way. I realize I pulled out of a campus where we supposedly have open academic dialogue because I became hostile to the military society, meaning to say that I became viewed as a hostile because they hate me. I became afraid of them, is a better word. I became significantly concerned that my presence was so abrasive to them that they were starting to lash out. I don't understand why that would happen in an academic environment. People should be able to talk openly about the issues, but they were trying to conscript me into silence about the issues, punish me for talking about the issues. I don't think that that's unknown phenomenon in Russia, which is the reason why I'm nervous that there's an alliance between Putin and Trumpy-Tune. I call them the Trumpy-Tune Putinese. And it's a ghoulish concern because I also recognize the professionalism and legitimacy of Russia, of the Kremlin when they talk in public. And the issues that they raise are credible. And I've seen the history of rejection of their reform. I understand that a revolution took place in Ukraine. So what I'm doing about it is looking into the Hollywood system. I'm not doing this deliberately to help Russia or to hurt Russia. I'm doing it because it's the direction of my research. Shows that Ray Harryhausen worked with J. Walter Thompson on films like Sinbad, which evokes specters of the Ukraine. So the swashbucklingness is part of a production system of spoils fighting that the mayhem representatives of people like Donald Trump and Paul Manafort have helped orchestrate in our turbulent world to their advantage. And the Russians seem to say, well, we're going to get in on the game. And I'm firmly opposed to the invasion of the Ukraine, but I can certainly see why the Russians need a buffer zone against what's happening in the Ukraine. So I got dragged into by Hollywood. This is important to understand, who are putting on this super production, all telling tall tales about Jimmy Carrey and virulently, violently hostile, truly hostile to the idea that I would break free from the persona, their words, that they created in kidnapping me. I'm not allowed to not be kidnapped as a child. I'm not allowed to break free from the persona they created when they kidnapped me as a child. I'm not allowed to be anyone but the implant of the neuroplasm. So I don't understand any of that really very clearly. I don't see how that could be imaginably be possible and tolerated and endured by anybody. It's a nightmare of a wizard war. And then they start using my poetry to hurt people or to make a mockery of me. You know, this is a hot wire system. It's a hot wire. It's a the way they used to hot wire cars in the east end of Pittsburgh. So what I'm doing is openness about it. I'm trying to discuss it, and they've covered it up by saying, "Oh, well, we tolerate the mentally ill and we evaluate." Well, that's true. We evaluate what people say who are under stress and trauma. You know, checks and balances are perfectly reasonable in a matter like this. So, I welcome inquiry, and I don't think that there's a right and wrong to what I'm doing. It's an attempt to just simply understand the issues. Now, where I will say that I draw the line in defending myself, I'm not doing any of this to hurt the United States. I recognize that it can be used to attack or hurt the United States, but what I'm finding when I look at these things like critical race theory is it was in place to be used by the attackers. I'll give you an example. They choked George Floyd to death. Geo is part of geopolitical, right? World. Floyd is like Pink Floyd. And everyone knows I'm very suspicious of the way Roger Waters came out, waved his hand. Hi, Russia. I'm getting all kinds of flack for supporting Russia. And then a bomb goes off, killing Daria Dugan. And this is a representative example of London and Pitt's nature of reality stuff, right? You know, the nature of reality, the false face of Fu Manchu. Beware the false face of Fu Manchu. Hollywood stuff. Okay. Well, Pink Floyd, is orchestrating this walrus thing, the hidden hand of James McRyland Crary, this Disneyland name, Wyland, Disney Wyland name, that they want to whoop-de-doo in a concert for, say, an end of the earth concert from the fossil fuel industry, right? Which has spanned the 20th century. My 1916 project shows that they were starting to work on it. And thank you, Camila Believa, for making sure I got the message about Ouspensky from 1916. The fourth dimensional people who've been plotting all of this crap. And the fact that the person who gave me the most timely insight into the situation is a Russian shows you how concerned they must be about the whole situation. I share their concern. I share everyone's concern about authoritarian regimes. I mean, they shouldn't be holding dissident women in prison. No, it's just a frightful thing to do. But I'm representing, someone would say, well, you wouldn't get away with what you're doing in Russia. There's two sides to that. The dissonance I've read about Russia say and criticize Mr. Putin on the grounds that it's a question of his arbitrary decision making power. Like it would be possible for Mr. Putin to recognize that I'm like one of the people who've tried to understand him honestly. Say Mac is an important dude. If he wants to take refuge in Russia, I'll help him. We'll talk to his mother. We're not going to hurt Mac. Okay. That's possible, but institutionally, it's just as possible that they would Brittany Griner me. You know, you're part of an international community, and what you did was fail. That the sort of thing that you get from the Beatles. So I'm aware of all of that. So what I am is a continuation of who I am. That's all. I didn't have anything to do with any of this stuff. My books and papers are a result of coming to grips with and trying to understand what happened. Now, as for being delegated an important person, where people want me to recognize them, I urge you to remember something. One thing, I'm injured all over my body. I'm getting tremors. I'm going to be evaluated in the hospital. I have brain injuries that have to be nursed. I remember things and sometimes don't remember names because I lost 98% of my hearing. No matter how well I speak, it's important to remember that I don't hear the repetition of names. There's no way for you to know if I'm neglecting or inattentive to you. I get this problem with people who think that they understand body language. A girl who I admire, who I think is in really good health, but she's overweight, thought that I was shortchanging her in the presence of a gorgeous girl when she caught my eye. What these women don't understand is I'm compromised in my manhood from medical abuses by a deranged community who did it presumably to make me an important person through torture, which is a ridiculous way to make a person important. So I don't think you should think of me as anything other than a peer from the public schools. And when I was thought of as a peer in the public schools, people mistreated me, they degraded me, they marginalized me, they made jokes of me. This was particularly true in the Jewish community, who disparaged me mercilessly. Now, why would I tolerate that? Was because I know what they went through. I mean, but I don't think it's legitimate to have a special education system in secret around the University of Pittsburgh, which is what they did. And there is some question of whether the Beatles in Russia knew about that. Back in the USSR was part of the Texas school book system where Oswald was in the USSR for Oswald Mosley, and some of the undercurrents of Russian federal super spy working with Andropov, which is where Mr. Putin comes from, knew about that. So he has access to the books. So he's probably aware that some of this happened. And they put out Judge Not Lest You Be Judged and put on this concert of stuff, right? And that's something we have to get into our heads. We're dealing with a sort of rock concert of phobias, that's being put on by people who've been in intelligence services. Like, there's one thing I really have to say about British media. It's very hard to forgive the people who put out that James Bond movie with COVID. It's very hard to forgive how violent to the mind the biological warfare threats in that movie were when COVID 19 emerged. It's very hard to take seriously the idea that there's some kind of symbol of humanity and compassion. If they're going to be symbols of humanity and compassion, I suggest they get on the ball and stop pulling stunts and stop terrorizing people at the roots of their power structure, which comes from Hollywood, Axis Hollywood. I'm really offended by what they did with that James Bond movie, and I'm not about to let the British forget that. I think they should put a stop to that kind of thing. The James Bond movies have been a nightmare for America since supposedly entertainment since the days of Shot in the Dark came out on the wings of the Kennedy assassination, and Mancini and the Texas school book got all, oh, that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing. Oh, you must be helping the Russians by framing Reagan. I'm not framing anybody. I'm looking at the evidence.